The sound of broken sobbing cut through the prairie night like a wounded animal's cry, and Eleanor Grace found herself frozen on the boarding house steps, her carpetbag heavy in her hand, as she listened to someone's private anguish spilling into the darkness beyond Great Bend, Kansas. It was June of 1878, and Eleanor had arrived in this frontier town only hours earlier, stepping off the dusty stagecoach with everything she owned packed into 2 worn bags, and a heart full of determination to start fresh after her father's debts had swallowed their Philadelphia home whole. The boarding house proprietor, a stern-faced widow named Mrs. Hutchins, had shown her to a cramped room on the 2nd floor with peeling wallpaper and a narrow bed, then informed her that supper was long past and breakfast would cost extra. Eleanor had unpacked her few belongings in silence, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this western town through the thin walls, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake in coming here. Now, standing in the cooling evening air with crickets singing their endless chorus, she heard something that made her own troubles seem small. The crying came from somewhere near the livery stable, raw and masculine, and utterly without restraint. Eleanor knew she should mind her own business. A proper lady did not insert herself into a stranger's private moments, especially not in a rough town like Great Bend where cowboys and cattlemen far outnumbered respectable folk. But something in that sound spoke to the loneliness she had been carrying since her father's death 6 months ago, the isolation of grief that no one else seemed to understand. She set down her carpetbag and walked toward the sound, her footsteps quiet on the hard, packed earth. The main street was largely empty at this hour, most folks either inside the saloons or already retired for the night. The livery stable loomed ahead, its big doors open to catch any breeze. The crying grew louder as she approached, and she could make out a figure sitting in the shadows beside the building, hunched over with his face in his hands. Eleanor stopped a respectful distance away, unsure what to do now that she had come this far. The man had not noticed her presence, lost as he was in whatever grief consumed him. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer some word of comfort, but nothing seemed adequate. What could she possibly say to a stranger in the depths of such obvious pain? Instead, she began to sing. The melody came to her unbidden, an old hymn her mother had sung when Eleanor was small, before the fever had taken her. "Come, ye disconsolate" was its name, and Eleanor's clear soprano voice carried the words into the night air like a prayer. She sang of mercy, of hope, of finding solace in the darkest hours, and as the verses poured out of her, she closed her eyes and thought of all the times she had needed such comfort herself. The sobbing gradually quieted as she sang. Eleanor kept her eyes closed, not wanting to embarrass the stranger by witnessing his tears. She sang all 3 verses, then let the last note fade into silence. The crickets resumed their song. Somewhere down the street, a horse whinnied softly in its sleep. When Eleanor finally opened her eyes, the man had risen to his feet. He stood in the shadows still, tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then his voice came, rough and thick with emotion. "That was the prettiest thing I ever heard in my whole life." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I am sorry if I intruded on your privacy. I only thought perhaps it might help." "Help?" The man let out a shaky breath that was half laugh, half sob. "Lady, you just pulled me back from the edge of a very dark place. I do not know who you are or why you did that, but I am more grateful than I can say." "Everyone needs comfort sometimes," Eleanor said softly. "I am glad I could offer some small measure of it." The man stepped forward slightly, and the moonlight caught his face for the first time. Eleanor saw a young man, perhaps 25 or 26 years old, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble and eyes that were red-rimmed from crying. Despite his current state, he was handsome in the rugged way of men who lived hard outdoor lives. Dirt streaked his face, and his dark hair stuck up at odd angles as if he had been running his hands through it repeatedly. "I am Isaac Dalton," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "I work cattle drives mostly, but I have been in Great Bend for 3 weeks now, dealing with family business." "Eleanor Grace," she replied. "I arrived today from Philadelphia." Isaac's eyes widened slightly. "That is a long way to come. You got family here?" "No, I came seeking employment." "I saw an advertisement for a schoolteacher position." "We could use one," Isaac said. "The old teacher moved to Denver last month. Lots of families around here would be glad to have their children learning again." He twisted his hat in his hands, seeming suddenly uncertain. "Miss Grace, I hope you will not think poorly of me for what you witnessed tonight. I am not usually given to such displays." "I think no less of you for it," Eleanor assured him. "In fact, I think perhaps it takes more courage to let oneself truly grieve than to bottle it all up inside." Isaac looked at her with something like wonder in his expression. "You are kind to say so. Most folks around here think a man should never show weakness." "Grief is not weakness, Mr. Dalton." He nodded slowly, then seemed to gather himself. "Would you permit me to walk you back to wherever you are staying? It is not entirely safe for a lady to be out alone after dark in this town." Eleanor accepted his escort, and they walked back toward the boarding house together. As they went, Isaac explained in a halting voice that his younger brother had died 3 weeks ago, kicked in the head by a spooked horse. The funeral had been today, and Isaac had just come from settling the last of his brother's affairs, selling off his few possessions to pay his debts. "Thomas was only 22, Isaac said quietly. "He had his whole life ahead of him. It does not seem real that he is gone." "I lost my father 6 months ago," Eleanor offered. "Some days I still expect to hear his voice calling me for supper." They reached the boarding house steps, and Isaac turned to face her fully. His eyes held a different kind of intensity now, no longer devastated but earnest and searching. "Miss Grace, I know we only just met, but I feel like I need to say this while I have the courage. You saved my life tonight." "I was sitting by that stable contemplating some very dark thoughts, and your voice pulled me back. I will never forget that kindness as long as I live." Eleanor felt her breath catch. "I am glad I happened to be there then." "Would it be terribly forward of me to ask if I might call on you sometime, to properly thank you?" "That would be acceptable," Eleanor said, surprised by how much she wanted him to do exactly that. "Though you owe me no debt, Mr. Dalton." "Isaac, please." "And I reckon I will be the judge of what I owe." A small smile touched his lips, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines of grief. "Good night, Miss Grace. Thank you again." Eleanor watched him walk back down the street until his figure disappeared into the shadows, then climbed the stairs to her room with her heart beating strangely fast in her chest. The next morning brought harsh Kansas sunshine and the reality of finding employment. Eleanor dressed in her most respectable dark blue dress and made her way to the small schoolhouse at the edge of town. The building was a simple whitewashed structure with a bell tower and windows that looked out over the prairie. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight that streamed through those windows, and rows of empty desks waited for students who had been without a teacher for weeks. She found the mayor's office on the main street, squeezed between a dry goods store and a barber shop. Mayor Edmund Prescott was a portly man in his 50s with impressive mutton chops and a skeptical expression that deepened as Eleanor explained her qualifications. She had completed her education at a ladies' seminary in Philadelphia and had assisted her father, himself a teacher, for 3 years before his death. "You look awfully young," Mayor Prescott said, leaning back in his chair until it creaked ominously. "And you are unmarried." "I am 23 years old, sir, and my marital status has no bearing on my ability to teach." "Might have bearing on whether parents trust you with their children. Young, unmarried woman, all alone in the world, no family to vouch for her character." He shook his head. "I do not know, Miss Grace." Eleanor felt desperation claw at her throat. She had spent nearly all her money getting to Kansas, banking on this position being available. "I can provide references from Philadelphia, letters attesting to my character and my father's reputation as an educator." "Those would take weeks to arrive," the mayor pointed out. "School needs to start up again. We have had parents complaining for a month now about their children running wild with no lessons." "Then give me a trial period," Eleanor suggested, leaning forward urgently. "1 month. If at the end of that time you are unsatisfied with my teaching, I will leave Great Bend and you will owe me nothing." Mayor Prescott stroked his mutton chops thoughtfully. "You would work for a month on faith that I might hire you permanent." "I would work for a month to prove my worth, yes. Though I would expect at least room and board in exchange." "The schoolhouse has living quarters attached," the mayor admitted. "Nothing fancy. 2 rooms at the back. The previous teacher stayed there. That would be perfect." After further discussion and some hard negotiating on Eleanor's part, Mayor Prescott agreed to her trial period. She would teach for 1 month, receiving room and board plus a small stipend for supplies. If parents were satisfied and their children showed progress, she would be hired permanently at a salary of $40 per month. It was not generous, but it was enough to live on, and Eleanor felt like crying with relief as she shook the mayor's hand. She spent the rest of that day cleaning the schoolhouse from top to bottom, scrubbing desks and sweeping floors until her back ached and her hands were raw. The living quarters were indeed humble. Just a small bedroom and a sitting area with a cast iron stove for heat and cooking. But after the cramped boarding house room, it felt like a palace. Eleanor unpacked her belongings properly this time, hanging her 2 other dresses on pegs and arranging her precious books on a shelf. That evening, as she stood surveying her new domain with satisfaction, a knock came at the schoolhouse door. Eleanor opened it to find Isaac Dalton standing on the step, freshly shaved and wearing clean clothes, his hair combed back and his hat in his hands. "I hope I am not disturbing you," he said. "I heard in town that you got the teaching position. I wanted to congratulate you." "Thank you. Would you like to come in?" "I'm afraid I cannot offer much hospitality yet. I have not had time to purchase supplies for tea or anything." "I am fine, thank you. Actually, I was wondering if you might like to take a walk. The evening is pleasant, and I thought I could show you around Great Bend a bit, if that would not be too forward." Eleanor accepted readily. They walked through the town as the sun painted the western sky in shades of orange and gold. Isaac pointed out the various establishments, the general store run by the Hoffmans, the church where Reverend Parker preached every Sunday, the saloon that was best avoided, and another saloon that was slightly more respectable but still not a place for ladies. He showed her where the creek ran just outside town, where women did laundry and children fished for catfish. "How long have you lived in Great Bend?" Eleanor asked as they strolled along the creek bank. "I do not really live here," Isaac admitted. "My family has a ranch about 10 miles north. I have been on cattle drives mostly since I was 18, 6 months at a time sometimes, driving herds up to Dodge City or Abilene. Thomas, my brother, he stayed home to help our pa with the ranch. That is what makes this all so hard, I think. I was away so much. I feel like I hardly knew him these last few years." I am sure he knew you loved him." Isaac was quiet for a moment, watching the water flow past. "I hope so. Our ma died when I was 15 and Thomas was only 11. Pa raised us best he could, but he is a hard man. Not much for showing affection. I always tried to look after Thomas when I was around, but I was away so often." He shook his head. "I keep thinking about all the times I chose to sign on for another drive instead of coming home. All those months I could have spent with him and did not." "You were making a living. That is nothing to feel guilty about. Maybe, but it does not change the regret." Isaac turned to look at her, his eyes intense. "That is part of why I wanted to talk to you, actually. I have been doing a lot of thinking since last night. Your singing, it gave me a moment of peace in all this darkness, and it made me realize something. Life is too short to waste, too short to put off the things that matter." Eleanor's heart began to beat faster. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I would like to get to know you better, Miss Grace. I know that is sudden. I know we only met yesterday under strange circumstances, but I feel like there is something here worth exploring, if you are willing." She studied his face, this cowboy who had been weeping in the shadows just 24 hours ago. There was vulnerability in his expression, but also strength. He had suffered a terrible loss and was still standing, still hoping. Eleanor found herself drawn to that resilience. "I would like that too," she said softly. Isaac's smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. "Really? You do not think I am crazy?" "Perhaps a little. But then, I am the woman who went walking toward sobbing in the dark, so I may not be the best judge of sanity." He laughed, a real laugh this time, and the sound made Eleanor's chest feel warm. They walked together until full darkness fell and propriety demanded she return to the schoolhouse. Isaac escorted her to the door and bid her good night with a promise to see her again soon. Eleanor lay awake that night in her narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the prairie through her window. She thought about Isaac Dalton and his grief-stricken eyes, about the way his whole face had changed when he smiled. She thought about her own loneliness and the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. It was too soon to call what she felt love, but it was certainly something. Something that made her glad she had come to Kansas after all. The school opened 3 days later with 17 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. Eleanor threw herself into teaching with determination, designing lessons that would challenge the older students while keeping the younger ones engaged. She taught reading and writing, arithmetic and geography, history and natural science. The children were a mixed group, some eager to learn and others resentful of being taken away from farm work. Eleanor was patient with all of them, remembering her father's philosophy that every child had potential if you could just find the right way to reach them. Isaac came by most evenings after that first walk. Sometimes they would stroll through town or along the creek. Other times they simply sat on the schoolhouse steps and talked as twilight deepened into night. He told her about his life on cattle drives, the vast herds of longhorns and the endless miles of prairie, the storms and stampedes and the hard camaraderie of the cowboys he worked alongside. She told him about Philadelphia, about her father's love of books and learning, about the difficulties of being a woman alone in the world with no family and limited prospects. "You have prospects now," Isaac pointed out one evening about 2 weeks after they had met. "The parents are singing your praises. Even Mayor Prescott admitted to me that he thinks you are doing a fine job. He still looks at me suspiciously every time I see him in town. That is just his face. He looks at everyone like that." Isaac shifted closer to her on the step, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Eleanor, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever think about staying here permanently, not just for the teaching job, but really making a life in Great Bend?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. I had not thought beyond securing the position, honestly. But yes, I suppose I could see myself building a life here. It is not Philadelphia, but it has its own kind of beauty, and the people have been mostly welcoming. Mostly. There are a few families who are not entirely comfortable with an unmarried woman teaching their children. Mrs. Hendricks in particular seems to think I am corrupting her sons somehow. Isaac snorted. Her sons are corrupting influences on themselves. Those boys have been troublemakers since they could walk. They fell silent, comfortable in each other's presence. The evening air was thick with the smell of approaching rain, and distant thunder rumbled on the horizon. Eleanor found herself acutely aware of Isaac's nearness, the warmth of his body and the sound of his breathing. "I look forward to these evenings all day long," Isaac said quietly. "Just sitting here with you, talking. It is the best part of every day." Eleanor's throat felt tight. "For me too." "I want to court you properly," he said, turning to face her. "With your permission, I want to be clear about my intentions so there is no confusion." "What are your intentions?" "To see if what I am feeling might grow into something lasting, and if it does, to ask you to be my wife someday." He reached out and took her hand carefully, as if she were something precious and fragile. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a couple of weeks, but Eleanor, I have never felt this way about anyone before. When I am with you, the grief over losing Thomas becomes bearable. You make me want to build a future instead of just drifting from one cattle drive to the next." Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, roughened by hard work, but holding hers with such gentleness. Her practical side said this was indeed too fast, that she should be cautious, but her heart was saying something entirely different. "I would be honored to be courted by you," she said. The smile that spread across Isaac's face was worth any risk. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. "You will not regret it," he promised. "I will do everything I can to make you happy." The summer deepened, and with it, Eleanor's feelings for Isaac grew as well. He courted her with a dedication that surprised the town gossips, who had expected the cowboy to lose interest once the initial attraction faded. Instead, he seemed more devoted with each passing week. He brought her wildflowers picked from the prairie, their bright blooms a splash of color against the endless grass. He fixed things around the schoolhouse without being asked, repairing a loose board here, replacing a cracked window there. When Eleanor mentioned missing the concerts she used to attend in Philadelphia, Isaac arranged for a visiting musician passing through town to give a special performance at the church, then sat beside her listening with rapt attention, even though he confessed he did not understand much about classical music. "I just like watching your face when you listen," he told her afterward. "You get this expression like you are somewhere far away and wonderful." Eleanor's trial month ended with Mayor Prescott grudgingly admitting she had exceeded expectations. The parents were pleased with their children's progress. Attendance had been excellent, and even the troublesome Hendricks boys had shown improvement in their reading. Eleanor was officially hired as the permanent schoolteacher, complete with a proper salary and a one-year contract. Isaac suggested they celebrate with a picnic. On the following Sunday, he arrived at the schoolhouse with a wagon and a basket packed with food from the hotel restaurant. They drove out onto the prairie, away from town until the buildings became small dots on the horizon. Isaac spread a blanket in the shade of a lone cottonwood tree, and they ate fried chicken and biscuits, potato salad and apple pie, while the wind whispered through the grass around them. "I have been thinking about the future," Isaac said as they finished eating. "About what I want my life to look like." Eleanor set down her plate, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "And what do you want it to look like?" "I want to settle down. Stop running all over the country on cattle drives and actually build something stable. My father's ranch, it is not huge, but it is decent land. Good grazing, access to water. When Thomas died, Pa lost his helper. He has been talking about selling the place, moving to town, maybe living with his brother in Kansas City. But I have been thinking, what if I took it over instead? Made it my own. Would your father agree to that? He said he would sell it to me at a fair price. I have money saved from years of drives, not enough to buy it outright, but enough for a good down payment. I could make the rest in payments over time. Eleanor's heart raced as she began to understand where this was leading. That sounds like a wonderful plan, Isaac. It does not make sense to do it alone, though. Ranching is hard work. A man needs a partner, someone to build a life with. He shifted to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Eleanor, I know we have only known each other 2 months. People will say it is too fast, that we should wait longer. But I am more sure of this than I have ever been of anything in my life. I love you. I think I started falling in love with you that very first night when your voice pulled me back from the darkness. Will you marry me? Eleanor felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. Yes, she said, her voice breaking on the word. Yes, I will marry you. Isaac let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She could feel his heart pounding as fast as her own. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this decision, he promised. I could never regret it. I love you too, Isaac. I have for weeks now, but I was afraid to say it. He kissed her then, softly and carefully, as if sealing a sacred promise. Eleanor had been kissed before. Awkward stolen moments with a boy back in Philadelphia before her father's death changed everything. But this was different. This kiss felt like coming home. They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans. Eleanor would continue teaching through the school year, fulfilling her contract with the town. Isaac would finalize the purchase of his father's ranch and begin making improvements to the property. The house was small but sound, needing mostly cosmetic repairs and some updating. They would marry in the fall, after the harvest and before winter set in. What about your teaching? Isaac asked as they drove back to town in the golden late afternoon light. Will you want to continue after we are married? Eleanor had been thinking about this question herself. I would like to, if it is possible. Perhaps not full-time, depending on what demands the ranch makes. But I love teaching, Isaac. It feels like important work. Then we will figure out a way to make it work, he said firmly. I do not want you to give up something you love just because you are becoming a wife. She leaned her head against his shoulder, overwhelmed by gratitude for this man who valued her dreams as much as his own. The news of their engagement spread through Great Bend like wildfire. Most people were happy for them, though there were skeptics who thought they were rushing into things. Mrs. Hendricks made pointed comments about the impropriety of such a hasty marriage, implying that there must be unsavory reasons for the speed. Eleanor held her head high and ignored the gossip, secure in the knowledge that she and Isaac were making the right choice. Reverend Parker agreed to perform the ceremony. Eleanor wrote letters to her few remaining friends in Philadelphia, announcing her upcoming marriage. She wished desperately that her father could be there to walk her down the aisle, but she tried to focus on the happiness of the present rather than dwelling on the sorrows of the past. Isaac's father came to town to meet Eleanor a few weeks after the engagement. Joseph Dalton was exactly as Isaac had described, a hard-weathered man in his 60s with few words and a stern expression. He looked Eleanor up and down with a critical eye that made her want to squirm. "So you are the woman my son wants to marry," he said without preamble. "Yes, sir." "I hope that meets with your approval." Does not matter much whether it does or not, seems like. Isaac has made up his mind. Joseph shifted his weight, his boots scraping against the schoolhouse floor. He tells me you are a teacher. I am. You know anything about ranching? No, sir. But I am willing to learn. Joseph grunted, which could have meant anything. Ranching is hard work, harder than standing in front of a bunch of children all day. You ready for that? Eleanor straightened her spine. Mr. Dalton, I traveled across half the country alone to make a new life for myself. I took a job in a town where I knew no one, proving myself to skeptical people who did not think I could do it. I have faced hardship before and survived it. I assure you I am ready for whatever challenges come. For the first time, something like respect flickered in Joseph's eyes. Maybe you will do after all. Isaac could use someone with backbone. Too soft-hearted, that boy. Always has been. Isaac, who had been standing tensely throughout this exchange, relaxed slightly. Pa, does this mean you approve? I suppose it does. When is this wedding happening? October 15th, Eleanor said. After harvest is complete. Good. Gives you time to get your affairs in order. Joseph nodded once decisively. I will be there, and I will have the ranch ready for you to take over. After Joseph left, Isaac pulled Eleanor into a relieved embrace. That went better than I expected. Pa almost never gives his approval to anything. I think he just wants to see you happy, Eleanor said. He has a strange way of showing it, but yes, I think you are right. The next few months passed in a blur of activity. Eleanor continued teaching while also preparing for her wedding. There was no money for an elaborate dress, so she made do with altering her best Sunday dress, adding lace she purchased from the general store and carefully sewing seed pearls around the neckline. The women of the town, warming to Eleanor now that she was becoming a respectable married woman, pitched in to help with wedding preparations. They organized a quilting bee to create a wedding quilt, each woman contributing a square. Even Mrs. Hendricks participated, though her square was noticeably less elaborate than the others. Isaac spent his days working on the ranch, repairing fences and outbuildings, repainting the house, and making sure everything was ready for his new bride. He came to town each Saturday evening to see Eleanor, and they would walk together or sit on the schoolhouse steps, talking about their future and dreaming about the life they would build together. I want us to have children, Isaac said one evening in late September, his arm around Eleanor's shoulders as they watched the sun set. Lots of them if we are blessed that way. The house will be full of noise and laughter instead of lonely and quiet like it was when I was growing up. I want that too, Eleanor said softly. I always imagined having a large family. Being an only child was lonely sometimes. How many do you think? Children, I mean. However many we are blessed with. 3, 4, 5, Isaac laughed. We might need to add on to the house. October 15th arrived with perfect autumn weather, the sky a brilliant blue and the air crisp, but not cold. Eleanor woke in the schoolhouse for the last time, her altered dress hanging on the door and butterflies dancing in her stomach. She had asked one of her students' mothers, a kind woman named Sarah Miller, to help her get ready. Sarah arrived mid-morning with her own daughter in tow, and together they helped Eleanor into her dress and arranged her dark hair in an elaborate updo with wildflowers woven through it. You look beautiful, Sarah said, her eyes misting. Isaac is a lucky man. I am the lucky one, Eleanor replied, and she meant it with her whole heart. The wedding took place at noon in the small church. Most of the town turned out for the event, packing the pews to capacity. Eleanor had no family to walk her down the aisle, so Mayor Prescott had offered to do the honors. Despite his initial skepticism about her, he had become something of a supporter over the months. You have done good work here, he told her as they waited in the church vestibule for the ceremony to begin. Great Bend is better for having you. I hope marriage will not take you away from teaching. I plan to continue as long as I am able, Eleanor assured him. Then the organ music began, and Mayor Prescott offered his arm. Eleanor took a deep breath and stepped forward into the church. The sea of faces turned toward her, but she only had eyes for Isaac, who stood at the altar in a new suit, his hair neatly combed and his face bright with joy. As she walked toward him down that short aisle, Eleanor thought about the night she had first seen him, broken and sobbing in the shadows. The transformation was remarkable. This was a man who had found his way back to hope. When she reached the altar, Isaac took her hands and smiled at her with such love that Eleanor felt her throat tighten with emotion. Reverend Parker began the ceremony, his deep voice sonorous in the quiet church. Eleanor barely heard the words, too focused on Isaac's face, on the feeling of his hands holding hers. When the Reverend asked if she took this man to be her lawfully wedded husband, her "I do" rang out clear and strong. Isaac's voice was equally firm when he made his own vows. Then came the exchange of simple gold bands that Isaac had purchased in town, and finally, the pronouncement that they were husband and wife. When Isaac kissed her, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration afterward took place at the hotel, where the dining room had been cleared for dancing, and long tables groaned under the weight of food brought by various townspeople. There was music from a fiddle player and a man with a harmonica, and Eleanor found herself swept into dance after dance, passed from partner to partner as was tradition. But her eyes kept finding Isaac across the room, and each time their gazes met, she felt a thrill run through her. Finally, as evening approached, they were able to slip away. Isaac had borrowed a wagon from a friend, decorating it with ribbons and tin cans that rattled as they drove. Eleanor waved goodbye to the well-wishers and leaned against her new husband's side as they headed out of town toward the ranch that would now be their home. The house was indeed small, but Isaac had clearly worked hard to make it welcoming. Fresh paint brightened the exterior, and someone had planted flowers along the front path. Inside, the main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace that would provide heat in winter. 2 bedrooms and a small bathing room completed the house. It was simple but clean and comfortable, and Eleanor loved it immediately. "Welcome home, Mrs. Dalton," Isaac said, sweeping her up in his arms to carry her over the threshold. Eleanor laughed, clinging to his neck. "I am officially Eleanor Dalton now. That will take some getting used to." "You have the rest of your life to get used to it." He set her down gently, then cupped her face in his hands. "Are you happy?" "Happier than I ever imagined being," she answered honestly. "When I left Philadelphia, I was running away from grief and debt and failure. I never dreamed I would find this a whole new life that actually feels like mine." "It is ours now," Isaac corrected. "Everything I have, everything I am, I share with you." That night, as they lay together in the bed that Isaac had built himself from sturdy oak, Eleanor thought about all the twists of fate that had led to this moment. If she had not left Philadelphia, if she had not arrived in Great Bend on that particular day, if she had not walked toward the sound of crying instead of away from it, none of this would have happened. She sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for whatever providence had guided her steps. Marriage agreed with both of them. Eleanor rose early each morning to prepare breakfast before making the journey into town for school. Isaac insisted on driving her most days, then returning in the afternoon to collect her. On the days when ranch work kept him occupied, Eleanor walked the 3 miles each way, enjoying the solitude and the wide open spaces that were so different from Philadelphia's crowded streets. In the evenings, they worked together on the ranch. Isaac taught Eleanor how to care for the cattle, how to mend fences and maintain equipment, how to read the weather and the land. She proved to be an apt student, though she freely admitted she would never love ranch work the way Isaac did. "That is fine," he assured her. "You have your teaching, which you love. The ranch is more my passion, but it means everything that you are willing to help." As winter approached, they settled into comfortable routines. Eleanor continued teaching, her students thriving under her instruction. Several of the older children who had been on the verge of dropping out to work full-time on their families' farms decided to stay in school, inspired by her encouragement. Mayor Prescott admitted that Great Bend had never had better educational outcomes. Isaac worked the ranch with determination, building up the herd and making improvements to the property. He was good at what he did, with an instinct for cattle and land management that impressed even his father. Joseph came by occasionally, ostensibly to check on his former property, but really to spend time with his son. Eleanor noticed that the relationship between them had thawed somewhat since the wedding, as if her presence had given them neutral ground to rebuild their bond. Christmas came, and Eleanor decorated the house with pine boughs and strings of popcorn, determined to make the holiday special. She had saved a bit of money from her teaching salary to buy Isaac a new bridle for his horse, tooled leather with silver fittings. He was delighted with the gift, and in turn presented her with something that made her cry. A beautiful wooden case containing a complete set of her father's books on education and philosophy, which he had tracked down and purchased from the creditors who had seized them in Philadelphia. "How did you even know about these?" Eleanor asked through her tears, running her hands over the familiar spines. "You mentioned them once, how much it had hurt to lose them. I wrote to some people in Philadelphia, did some searching. It took a while, but I found them." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I know they cannot replace your father, but I hoped having his books might bring you some comfort." "You are the most wonderful man," Eleanor said fiercely. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." "I love you too. More than I knew it was possible to love anyone." As the new year of 1879 arrived, Eleanor began to suspect she might be pregnant. By February, her suspicions were confirmed. She told Isaac one evening after supper, watching nervously for his reaction. His face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, and finally pure joy. "A baby," he said, his voice almost breaking on the words. "We are going to have a baby, in late summer, I think. August or September." Isaac whooped and spun her around in a circle before carefully setting her down, suddenly worried he might have hurt her. "Should you still be teaching? Is it safe? Should you be resting?" Eleanor laughed at his concern. "Women have babies all the time while continuing their regular activities." "I am perfectly fine, Isaac, though I will need to arrange for a replacement teacher toward the end of the school year." "A baby," Isaac repeated, still seemingly unable to process it. "We are going to be parents." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring. Eleanor continued teaching, though she did eventually have to let out her dresses and accept that everyone in town knew about her condition. The women offered advice, both solicited and unsolicited, about everything from mourning sickness to preparing for childbirth. Sarah Miller, who had 5 children of her own, became Eleanor's unofficial guide through the experience. As the school year ended, Eleanor trained a young woman named Rebecca Foster to take over teaching duties in the fall. Rebecca was 19 and enthusiastic, thrilled to have the opportunity even if it was temporary. Eleanor planned to return to teaching once the baby was old enough, though she knew it would be challenging to balance motherhood and her profession. Summer heat settled over Kansas, and Eleanor found herself increasingly uncomfortable as her belly grew. Isaac fretted over her constantly, insisting she rest more and do less. She tolerated his hovering with mostly good humor, knowing it came from love. On a sweltering August afternoon, Eleanor's labor began. Isaac sent for the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. O'Brien who had delivered half the babies in the county. Then he paced the main room of the house like a caged animal, starting at every sound from the bedroom where Eleanor labored with Mrs. O'Brien's assistance. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Isaac barely left the door of the bedroom, ignoring Mrs. O'Brien's suggestions that he go outside or find something to occupy himself. When Eleanor cried out in pain, he flinched as if he had been struck. Finally, in the late afternoon of the second day, a baby's wail filled the house. Mrs. O'Brien emerged a few minutes later, carrying a small bundle. "You have a son, Mr. Dalton, a healthy boy with good lungs." Isaac took the baby with shaking hands, staring down at the tiny red face with wonder. "A son," he whispered. "Can I see Eleanor? Give her a few minutes. She is exhausted, but she did wonderfully. You have a strong wife." When Isaac was finally allowed into the bedroom, he found Eleanor propped up against pillows, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat but smiling. She reached for the baby, and he placed their son carefully in her arms. "He is perfect," Eleanor said softly, touching the baby's tiny fingers. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names during the pregnancy but never settled on anything definite. Isaac looked down at his son and said, "Thomas. I would like to name him Thomas after my brother, if that is acceptable to you." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I think that is perfect. Thomas Dalton." Baby Thomas thrived, growing steadily and filling the house with his presence. Isaac was a devoted father, taking on night feedings when he could and walking the floor with Thomas when he fussed. Eleanor had never seen him happier than when he held their son. Singing soft lullabies or telling stories the baby was far too young to understand. When fall arrived and school resumed, Eleanor found herself torn between her love of teaching and her desire to be with her baby. She ultimately decided to teach only 3 days a week, with Rebecca handling the other 2 days. It was not ideal, but it allowed Eleanor to maintain her connection to her students while also being present for Thomas. The first time Eleanor brought Thomas to town, she stopped by the schoolhouse to show him to her students. The children crowded around, eager to see the baby, asking endless questions about how small he was and what he ate and whether he could do anything yet besides cry and sleep. "He will grow," Eleanor told them. "And someday, if I am still teaching here, he will sit in one of these desks and learn his letters just like you are learning yours." The thought filled her with a strange emotion, imagining her son grown enough for school, no longer the tiny infant she held in her arms. Time felt both infinite and fleeting. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Isaac had a gift for ranching, making smart decisions about breeding stock and land use. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, with enough to meet their needs and a little left over for savings. Isaac hired a hand to help with the heaviest work, a young man named Pete who was steady and reliable. When Thomas was 2 years old, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy seemed easier. In the spring of 1882, she gave birth to a daughter they named Alice. The labor was shorter, and Eleanor recovered more quickly. Isaac was just as smitten with his daughter as he had been with his son, walking around with Alice draped over his shoulder like a sack of grain, her tiny fists tangled in his shirt. 2 children, Isaac marveled one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Thomas chase fireflies in the yard while Alice slept in Eleanor's arms. "We have 2 children. Sometimes I can barely believe this is my life." "Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, though she could see the answer in his face. Happy does not begin to cover it. That night you sang to me when I was at my lowest, I could not imagine ever feeling joy again. And now look at us. I have you, our children, a home, a purpose. You gave me all of that. We gave it to each other, Eleanor corrected. I was alone and lost when I came to Great Bend. You gave me a family, a place to belong. I am just as grateful as you are. Life continued its steady rhythm. Thomas and Alice grew and the ranch prospered. Eleanor continued to teach part-time, training Rebecca to eventually take over full-time as Eleanor's family responsibilities grew. In 1884, another son was born whom they named Samuel. Then, 2 years later, twin girls arrived, causing chaos and joy in equal measure. They named the twins Catherine and Margaret, and the house was indeed as full of noise and laughter as Isaac had once dreamed. Joseph Dalton, mellowing with age, became a doting grandfather. He visited often, teaching Thomas and Samuel about cattle and ranching, dandling the younger children on his knee and telling them stories about the old days. He and Isaac developed a relationship they had never managed when Isaac was young, finding common ground in ranching and family. As the 1880s gave way to the 1890s, Great Bend grew and changed. More families moved to the area, drawn by the promise of good land and opportunity. The railroad expanded, bringing easier access to markets and supplies. The wild frontier feel of the town gradually civilized, with more churches and schools and civic organizations. Eleanor eventually retired from teaching when her youngest children started school themselves. She devoted her time to raising her family and helping Isaac run the ranch, which had grown substantially over the years. They had become one of the more successful ranching families in the area, respected members of the community. On a warm June evening in 1895, Isaac and Eleanor sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. Their children were all inside, the older ones helping the younger ones prepare for bed. It had been 17 years since their wedding, 17 years of building a life together. "Do you ever think about that first night?" Isaac asked, reaching over to take Eleanor's hand. "When you sang to me." "I think about it often," Eleanor admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago, and yet I can remember every detail. How frightened I was, how alone I felt, how I heard you crying and somehow knew I needed to reach out. I was planning to ride out into the prairie that night and not come back," Isaac said quietly. It was not the first time he had told her this, but it still made Eleanor's breath catch. "I could not see any reason to keep going without Thomas. The grief was crushing me. And then I heard your voice singing, and it was like a rope thrown to a drowning man. You saved my life. You saved mine too. Maybe not in as dramatic a fashion, but you gave me everything I had lost and more. Family, home, purpose, love. So much love." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined as the stars began to appear overhead. From inside the house came the sound of their children's voices, laughing and arguing and settling in for the night. It was the soundtrack of their lives, familiar and precious. "I would do it all again," Isaac said. "Every single moment, even the hard ones, because they all led to this." "So would I," Eleanor agreed. "Every moment." As the years continued to pass, their children grew into adults with their own dreams and ambitions. Thomas, their eldest, took to ranching with the same passion as his father and grandfather, eventually becoming Isaac's full partner in running the operation. Samuel showed an aptitude for mechanics and engineering, fascinated by the new technologies emerging at the turn of the century. Alice became a teacher like her mother, taking over the Great Bend School and bringing her own innovations to education. The twins, Catherine and Margaret, were inseparable and both married brothers from a neighboring ranch, ensuring they would never be far apart. Isaac's father, Joseph, passed peacefully in his sleep in 1900 at the age of 83. Isaac grieved but took comfort in knowing he had been able to build a better relationship with his father in those later years, breaking the cycle of distance and emotional restraint that had characterized Joseph's parenting. At the funeral, Isaac delivered a eulogy that was honest about his father's flaws but also acknowledged his strengths and the love that had always been there, even when poorly expressed. "He taught me resilience," Isaac said, standing before the gathered mourners. "He taught me that a man provides for his family, no matter what. He was not always easy to live with, and he was not demonstrative with his affection, but he did his best with what he knew. And in the end, he showed me that it is never too late to change, to build bridges, to choose connection over isolation. I will miss him." Eleanor stood beside her husband at the funeral, her hand in his, their grown children ranged around them. She thought about all the threads of family that had woven together over the years, creating a tapestry far more beautiful than anything she could have imagined that first day stepping off the stagecoach in Great Bend. As the new century progressed, Isaac and Eleanor gradually transitioned into the role of elder generation. They became grandparents multiple times over, their house often filled with visiting grandchildren who ran through the rooms where their own parents had once played. Isaac taught his grandsons about cattle and ranching, passing down knowledge and skills. Eleanor read to her granddaughters and grandsons alike, instilling in them the love of learning that had shaped her own life. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1903, their children organized a celebration. The house and yard were filled with family and friends, many of whom had been at their wedding all those years ago. Mayor Prescott, long retired and now in his 80s, gave a speech about how Eleanor had been the best teacher Great Bend ever had. Sarah Miller, Eleanor's friend through so many years, spoke about the example their marriage had set for the community. When Isaac was called upon to speak, he rose and pulled Eleanor to her feet beside him. "25 years ago, I married the woman who saved my life. She does not like when I say that because she is modest, but it is the simple truth. I was broken, lost, drowning in grief, and her voice pulled me back to the world of the living. Everything good in my life flows from that moment when she chose to sing to a crying stranger in the dark." Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks as Isaac continued. "But what she gave me that night was just the beginning. Every day since, she has given me love, partnership, laughter, and strength. She has borne our children and helped build our home. She has been my best friend and my greatest supporter. Eleanor, you are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I love you more with every passing year." The gathering erupted in applause. Eleanor hugged her husband tightly, overwhelmed with gratitude for this life they had built together. As they moved into their 50s and then 60s, Isaac and Eleanor finally had the luxury of slowing down. Thomas ran the ranch day to day, with Isaac serving as advisor rather than primary operator. This gave them time to focus on each other, in ways they had not been able to when raising children and building a business consumed all their energy. They took walks together in the evenings, retracing the paths they had walked during their courtship. They traveled occasionally, visiting their children and grandchildren who had settled in various parts of Kansas and beyond. They read together in the evenings, Eleanor finally having time to revisit all her father's books that Isaac had recovered for her so many years ago. "I have been thinking," Eleanor said one evening as they sat together on the porch in their favorite rocking chairs, "about how strange it is that my father's death, which felt like the end of my world, was actually the beginning of my real life. If he had not died, if we had not lost everything, I never would have come to Kansas. I never would have met you. Strange how that works, Isaac agreed. If Thomas had not died, I would not have been in Great Bend that night. I would have been off on some cattle drive, and we never would have crossed paths. It feels almost wrong to say I am grateful for the circumstances that brought us together, when those circumstances involved such loss. But we can be grateful for what came from the loss, even while still mourning what we lost. Those things can exist together. Isaac reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after so many years. You are wise, Eleanor Dalton. I have had a good teacher in life's lessons. In 1915, Isaac and Eleanor celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. By this time, they had 12 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. The celebration was smaller than their 25th, as many of them preferred quieter gatherings now, but it was no less meaningful. Their children toasted them, their grandchildren performed songs and recitations, and Isaac gave Eleanor a locket containing tiny photographs of all their descendants. So you can carry them all with you always, he explained. That night, lying in bed in the darkness, Eleanor asked the question that had been on her mind increasingly. Do you ever wish things had been different, that you had married someone younger, someone who could have given you more years? Isaac turned to face her, his hand finding hers under the quilt. Not for a single second. Every year with you has been a gift. I do not want more years with someone else. I want every moment I can get with you, and I am grateful for each one. I am afraid, Eleanor admitted quietly. We are getting older, Isaac. I see it in the mirror, feel it in my joints. Someday one of us will have to say goodbye to the other, and I do not know how to bear that thought. We do not have to bear it yet, Isaac said gently. Right now we are here together. That is enough. They had both expected Isaac to be the one to go first. He was the one who had lived the harder physical life, who had worked outdoors in all weather for decades. But fate had other plans. In the spring of 1918, Eleanor developed a persistent cough that would not go away. The doctor diagnosed pneumonia and prescribed rest and care. But Eleanor's lungs had been weakened by years of Kansas dust, and the illness did not respond to treatment as well as everyone hoped. Isaac rarely left her bedside during those weeks. Their children came to visit, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren to say goodbye, though no one wanted to use that word. Eleanor was 72 years old and had lived a full life, but Isaac could not imagine the world without her in it. On a soft May evening, with the windows open to let in the spring breeze, Eleanor reached for Isaac's hand. Her breathing was labored, each breath a struggle, but her eyes were clear as she looked at him. "Sing to me," she whispered. Isaac felt his throat close with emotion. "I cannot sing like you do. It does not matter. Please." So Isaac, his voice rough and unpracticed, began to sing the hymn she had sung to him that first night 40 years ago. "Come, ye disconsolate" felt unbearably poignant now, its words about mercy and hope taking on new meaning. He sang all 3 verses, his voice breaking on the final lines, as Eleanor's breathing gradually slowed and then stopped altogether. She passed peacefully, with the man she loved singing to her just as she had once sung to him. It felt like a circle completing itself. The funeral was held at the same church where they had married, now presided over by a new minister who was the son of Reverend Parker. Half the county seemed to attend, people whose lives Eleanor had touched through her teaching or her kindness, or simply her presence in the community. Isaac stood beside her casket, accepting condolences, feeling like half of himself had been torn away. In the days and weeks that followed, Isaac struggled to find his footing without Eleanor. The house felt too quiet, too empty, even when filled with visiting children and grandchildren. He found himself unable to sleep in their bed, instead spending nights in the rocking chair on the porch, watching the stars and remembering. Thomas moved back to the main house to stay with his father, worried about leaving him alone in his grief. "Pa, you have to eat something," he would say, bringing meals that Isaac barely touched. "Ma would not want you wasting away." "I know," Isaac would reply. "I just need time." Time passed, as it always does. The immediate raw grief gradually transformed into something more bearable, though Isaac carried Eleanor's absence with him every moment of every day. He began to find small comforts in memories, in the locket she had left him containing a lock of her hair, in the books they had read together, in the songs she had loved. One evening, about 6 months after Eleanor's death, Isaac found himself standing near the old livery stable in town, near the spot where he had been sitting that night in 1878 when a stranger's voice had pulled him back from the darkness. The stable was different now, expanded and modernized, but the location was the same. He thought about that night, about the broken young man he had been, drowning in grief over his brother's death and unable to see any path forward. He thought about Eleanor's voice coming out of the darkness like an angel's, offering comfort without judgment. That moment had changed the trajectory of his entire life, leading to 40 years of love and partnership that he would not trade for anything. Isaac realized that he had a choice to make, the same choice he had faced that night 4 decades ago. He could sink into this grief and let it consume him, or he could choose to honor Eleanor's memory by continuing to live, by finding meaning and purpose in the time he had left. She had pulled him back from the edge once. He owed it to her to stay back from it now. He began to engage with life again, slowly at first. He spent more time with his children and grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandmother and mother, making sure they knew how extraordinary she had been. He helped Thomas with the ranch when his aged body allowed, offering advice and wisdom earned through decades of experience. He attended church and community events, maintaining the connections Eleanor had valued. One evening, Thomas's youngest daughter, a girl of 8 named Eleanor after her grandmother, asked Isaac to tell her about how he and her grandmother had met. They were sitting on the porch, the summer sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold, and Isaac found himself able to tell the story without the crushing weight of grief that had pressed on him for months. "Your grandmother saved my life," he began, and then he told young Eleanor the whole story, from his brother's death through that moment of desperate sorrow by the livery stable, to the voice singing in the darkness, to the 40 years of love that had followed. "She must have been very brave," young Eleanor said when he finished, "to go towards someone who was crying instead of away from them." "She was the bravest person I ever knew," Isaac agreed, "and the kindest and the smartest and the most beautiful. I wish I could have known her better. I was so young when she died. She loved you very much. She loved all of you." Isaac put his arm around his granddaughter's shoulders. "And you know what? You have the same gift she did, the gift of empathy, of caring about others. I see it in you all the time." Young Eleanor beamed at this comparison to her namesake, and Isaac felt something warm bloom in his chest. This was how Eleanor would live on, not just in memories but in the values she had instilled in her descendants, in the kindness and compassion they showed to the world. Isaac Dalton lived another 5 years after Eleanor's death, years that were not always easy but were filled with family and purpose. He continued to be a presence in his children's and grandchildren's lives, a source of wisdom and stability. He spoke often of Eleanor, keeping her memory alive through stories and remembrances. On a crisp autumn afternoon in 1923, Isaac sat in his rocking chair on the porch, a quilt Eleanor had made wrapped around his shoulders. He was 86 years old, his body worn out from a long life of hard work, but his mind was still sharp. Thomas sat with him as he often did these days, the two of them enjoying the comfortable silence of shared company. "Pa, can I ask you something?" Thomas said after a while. "Of course." "Do you have any regrets, looking back on everything?" Isaac thought about the question carefully. "I regret the time I spent away from my brother, all those months on cattle drives when I could have been home with him. I wish I had been a better son to my own father in his younger years, though I am grateful we mended things before he died. But overall, no. The life I built with your mother, the family we created, the home we made together, I regret none of that. Every choice that led me to her was the right choice. She changed everything for you. She did. And I hope I did the same for her." "You did, Pa. She told me once that you made her happier than she ever dreamed possible." Isaac smiled, his eyes drifting closed. "Then I did what I set out to do." Thomas sat with his father as the afternoon faded into evening. At some point, he realized Isaac's breathing had changed, becoming slower and more shallow. By the time the first stars appeared, Isaac Dalton had slipped away peacefully, joining the woman he had loved for more than 40 years. The joint headstone that was placed in the Great Bend Cemetery read simply, "Isaac Dalton, 1853–1923, and Eleanor Grace Dalton, 1846–1918. Their song continues in all they loved." And it did continue. Their children carried forward the values they had been taught, passing them down to their own children and grandchildren. The ranch Thomas inherited remained in the family for generations, a testament to Isaac's hard work and vision. The school where Eleanor had taught was eventually named in her honor, with a small plaque commemorating her years of service to the community's children. But perhaps the most enduring legacy was the story itself, the tale of how a stranger's song in the darkness had pulled a grieving man back from the edge and sparked a love that lasted a lifetime. It became a family legend, told and retold across generations, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. Great Bend itself continued to grow and prosper, transforming from a rough frontier town into a thriving Kansas community. The old landmarks Isaac and Eleanor had known gradually disappeared, replaced by more modern structures, but the spirit of the place remained. It was still a town where people looked out for each other, where compassion mattered as much as hard work, where love could bloom in unexpected places. In later years, some of Isaac and Eleanor's descendants would make pilgrimages to Great Bend, walking the streets their ancestors had walked, visiting the cemetery where they were buried side by side, trying to imagine what it had been like in those days. They would stand near where the old livery stable had been and picture that moment in 1878 when everything changed, when a woman with a beautiful voice sang comfort to a crying stranger and set in motion a love story that would echo through generations. The story served as a reminder that grief, while devastating, did not have to be the end. That human connection could pull us back from our darkest moments. That love, real love, was worth the risk of eventual loss because the joy it brought outweighed even the pain of goodbye. That choosing to reach out, to offer comfort, to be vulnerable, could transform not just one life but many. Thomas, before his own death at a ripe old age in the 1950s, wrote down the full story of his parents' meeting and marriage, wanting to preserve it for future generations. He described in detail that night by the livery stable, the singing that had saved his father's life, the courtship and marriage, the building of a family and a legacy. "My father always said my mother saved his life," Thomas wrote in his memoir, "but I think the truth is they saved each other. She was alone in the world, grieving her own losses, trying to find her place. He was drowning in sorrow and could not see a way forward. Together, They built something beautiful, something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. Their love was the foundation on which our entire family was built, and we are all beneficiaries of that moment when she chose to sing to a crying stranger in the dark. The memoir became a treasured family document, photocopied and shared among all the various branches of the Dalton family tree. It inspired marriages and helped heal heartbreaks. It reminded family members in their own dark moments that they came from people who had endured loss and found love anyway, who had built lives of meaning and purpose through hard work and devotion to each other. One story in particular illustrated the lasting impact of Isaac and Eleanor's legacy. In the 1980s, a Dalton descendant named Jennifer was going through a devastating divorce. She felt like her life was over, like she would never trust or love again. Her grandmother gave her a copy of Thomas's memoir and told her to read it. Jennifer read about her great-great-great-grandparents, about Eleanor's courage in traveling across the country alone, about Isaac's descent into suicidal despair, and his rescue by a stranger's kindness. She read about their 40 years together, the challenges they faced and overcame, the family they built, the love that sustained them through everything. When she finished reading, Jennifer called her grandmother. "They really did all that. It is all true, every word," her grandmother confirmed. "That is where you come from, honey. People who faced impossible odds and chose to keep going. People who found love in the darkest times. You have that strength in you too." Jennifer kept the memoir close through her own healing journey. Whenever she felt overwhelmed or hopeless, she would read passages from it, drawing strength from ancestors she had never met but whose blood ran in her veins. Eventually, she did love again, marrying a kind man who reminded her in some ways of Isaac, patient and devoted and willing to work through hard things together. At her wedding, Jennifer included a reading from Thomas's memoir, the passage where Isaac proposed to Eleanor under the cottonwood tree. "I know we have only known each other 2 months," the passage read. "People will say it is too fast, that we should wait longer, but I am more sure of this than I have ever been of anything in my life. I love you. That is the kind of certainty I want to build my marriage on," Jennifer told her wedding guests. "The kind my great-great-great-grandparents had. The certainty that love is worth the risk, that building a life together is the greatest adventure, that choosing each other every day is what makes a marriage last." Stories like Jennifer's multiplied across the generations. The tale of Isaac and Eleanor became not just family history but inspiration, a touchstone for Dalton descendants facing their own challenges. When times were hard, when love seemed impossible, when grief threatened to overwhelm, they remembered the crying stranger and the woman who sang to him, and they found courage to continue. The ranch itself eventually passed out of the family in the early 2000s, sold to a corporation, as the last Dalton rancher retired without children willing to take over the operation. But before the sale was finalized, a huge family reunion was held on the property, bringing together Dalton descendants from across the country. Over 200 people gathered to celebrate their shared heritage and honor the couple who had started it all. They stood together near the house Isaac had built and Eleanor had made into a home. Someone had found an old recording of "Come, Ye Disconsolate," the hymn Eleanor had sung that fateful night, and they played it through portable speakers as the sun set over the Kansas prairie. Many wept as they listened, thinking about all the years and all the lives that had flowed from one moment of compassion. The oldest person present, Isaac and Eleanor's great-great-granddaughter Marjorie, who was 96 years old, shared her memories of meeting her great-grandparents as a small child just before Eleanor died. "I do not remember much," she admitted. "I was only about 5 years old." but I remember how they looked at each other, like they were still young lovers instead of an old married couple. And I remember my great-grandmother Eleanor singing to me. She had the most beautiful voice. It made everything feel safe and right with the world. The family reunion became a catalyst for many Dalton descendants to reconnect with their heritage. Some began researching the family tree in more detail, uncovering stories of other ancestors and their own struggles and triumphs. Others visited Great Bend for the first time, walking the streets and visiting the cemetery, trying to connect with the place that had been so central to their family history. The schoolhouse where Eleanor had taught was long gone, replaced by a modern educational complex. But the Great Bend Historical Society had preserved records from her teaching years, including class rosters and some of her lesson plans. Reading through these documents, her descendants could see the care she had put into her profession, the attention she paid to each student, the innovative teaching methods she had employed. She was ahead of her time, one educator descendant noted. The things she was doing in the 1880s, we are just now recognizing as best practices in education. Individualized instruction, hands-on learning, connecting lessons to students' lived experiences. She understood intuitively what we now have research to support. As the 21st century progressed, the story of Isaac and Eleanor found new relevance. In an age of instant communication but often shallow connection, their tale of deep, lasting love built on mutual respect and genuine partnership resonated with people longing for something more substantial. Family members would share the story on social media, and it would spread beyond just the Dalton family, touching strangers who were moved by the romance and the reminder that true love still existed. One particular retelling went viral, a blog post written by one of Eleanor's great-great-great-great-granddaughters about what we could learn from her ancestors' relationship. They did not have dating apps or social media, she wrote. They could not text each other or video chat. What they had was intention. They chose each other deliberately and then showed up for that choice every single day for 40 years. In our modern world of infinite options and constant distraction, there is something revolutionary about that kind of commitment. The post was shared thousands of times, with commenters from around the world expressing their admiration for Isaac and Eleanor's story. Many said it gave them hope that lasting love was still possible, that you could find your person and build a life together that would stand the test of time. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to Isaac and Eleanor's legacy came from an unlikely source. A composer who was descended from them, several generations removed, decided to create a musical piece inspired by their story. She called it Song in the Darkness, and it premiered at a concert hall in Kansas City in 2015, exactly 137 years after that night by the Livery Stable. The piece began with a solo soprano voice singing Come, Ye Disconsolate a cappella, representing Eleanor's singing. Then other instruments gradually joined in, representing Isaac's life being rebuilt, the family they created, the legacy that spread outward. The music swelled and ebbed, incorporating themes of grief and hope, loss and love, solitude and connection. It culminated in a full orchestral rendition that celebrated not just Isaac and Eleanor, but all the generations that had come from them, all the love and life and possibility that had flowed from one woman's decision to sing to a crying stranger. At the premiere, dozens of Dalton family members were in attendance. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of profound silence before the audience erupted in applause. Many were crying, moved by the music and the story behind it. The composer took her bow, then gestured to her family members in the audience, acknowledging that the music was really theirs, born from a shared heritage of love and resilience. In the reception afterward, family members shared their own stories about how Isaac and Eleanor's example had impacted their lives, how it had given them courage to take risks in their own relationships, how it had helped them weather storms in their marriages, how it had reminded them that grief, while painful, could be survived and even transformed into something beautiful. They never could have imagined this, someone said, gesturing at the gathered crowd of descendants and admirers. That night by the livery stable, they could not have known their story would echo through centuries, inspiring people they would never meet. But that is the nature of love, another family member replied. It ripples outward in ways we cannot predict or control. Every act of kindness, every moment of genuine connection, it all matters more than we know. As the night wore on and people began to leave, a few family members lingered in the concert hall. They talked quietly about what it meant to carry this legacy, to be descended from such a powerful love story. They acknowledged the responsibility of it, the way it set a high bar for their own relationships. But they also spoke of the gift it was, this reminder that they came from people who had loved deeply and well, who had chosen each other and kept choosing each other through all the years of their lives. One younger family member, engaged to be married, asked for advice. How do we live up to this? How do we build something that lasts like their marriage did? The oldest person in the group, a grandson of Thomas who had known both Isaac and Eleanor in his youth, smiled. You do not try to replicate their marriage. You cannot, because you are different people living in a different time. What you do is take the principles they lived by and apply them to your own life. Be kind to each other. Choose each other deliberately. Show up, even when it is hard. Be willing to pull each other back from dark places. Sing to each other, literally or figuratively. That is what they did, and that is why their love lasted. It was simple advice, but profound in its simplicity. As the group finally left the concert hall and went out into the Kansas City night, they carried those words with them, along with the music that still seemed to echo in their ears, along with the story that had shaped them all. The legacy of Isaac and Eleanor Dalton was not measured in wealth or fame. They had never been rich or powerful in the conventional sense. Isaac had been a cowboy and rancher. Eleanor had been a teacher. They had lived ordinary lives by most standards, raising their children and working their land and being part of their community. But the love they shared, born from a moment of desperate need met with compassionate response, had proven to be anything but ordinary. It had created a family that spread across the country and beyond. It had inspired generations to believe in the possibility of lasting love. It had reminded countless people that our darkest moments do not have to define us, that redemption and connection are always possible, that singing in the darkness can change everything. And so their story continued, passed down through the years, adapted and retold, but always true at its core. A woman with a beautiful voice heard a stranger crying and chose to offer comfort through song. That stranger was a cowboy named Isaac Dalton, and he never stopped listening, not just that night but for 40 years of marriage. He listened to Eleanor's wisdom, her dreams, her fears, her hopes. She listened to him in return, and together they created harmony where there had been only discord. Their graves in Great Bend still receive visitors, family members and the occasional stranger who has heard their story and wants to pay respects. Flowers are left regularly, and on their wedding anniversary each year, someone always makes sure fresh bouquets are placed at their headstone. The tradition started with their children and has been maintained through every generation since. The town of Great Bend itself has embraced the story as part of its heritage. The Historical Society maintains files on both Isaac and Eleanor, documenting their contributions to the community. There is talk of placing a historical marker near the site of the old livery stable, commemorating that night in 1878 when everything changed. But the truest monument to Isaac and Eleanor Dalton is not made of stone or bronze. It is the love that continues to flow through their descendants, the compassion they show to others, the resilience they demonstrate in hard times, the commitment they bring to their own relationships. Every time a Dalton descendant reaches out to someone in pain, they are honoring Eleanor's example. Every time they choose to show up for their partner when things are difficult, they are following Isaac's path. The story of she sang to comfort a crying stranger. The cowboy was that stranger and never stopped listening, is ultimately a story about the power of human connection to transform lives. It is about how one moment of genuine compassion can create ripples that spread far beyond anything we can imagine. It is about love that endures not because it is easy, but because two people chose to make it so, day after day, year after year, through joy and sorrow alike. Isaac and Eleanor Dalton lived, loved, and eventually died as all people do. But the love they shared, the family they created, the example they set, all of that continues. Their song, begun on a dark June night in 1878, still echoes through the generations, a reminder that we are never too lost to be found, never too broken to be healed, never too alone to be loved. We need only listen for the voice singing in our darkness, and have the courage to sing in return when we hear someone else crying in theirs.